So we've been kind of trying to find a new spot for our laughter is the best medicine. So we're going to try it here for today. This one's a short one. It says, a nervous taxpayer was unhappily conversing with the IRS auditor who had come to review his records. At one point, the auditor exclaimed, "We feel it is a great privilege to be allowed to work here in the United States of America. As a citizen, you have an obligation to pay taxes, and we expect you to eagerly pay them with a smile." The taxpayer goes, "A smile? Oh, thank God, I thought you wanted money." I can smile all day long. That's not a problem. Anyway, today's lesson is reconciling science and religion. And I have been wanting to share this lesson since I've got here. I got here in January, and I've been wanting to share this lesson with you since then because it was the very first lesson I ever did at a Unity Center. The minister was going to go on vacation, and he says, talk about something, just light. Don't worry about it. I say, I can do light all day long, right? But that was over 10 years ago, and I had written an op-ed for the paper about science and religion, that basically they're one. And to my surprise, he printed it. And of course, in the following days, I got several remarks about it in the paper, some very interesting feedback. One from a lady who had been teaching Baptist church Sunday school for 50 years, and then another gentleman who was quite adamant that I absolutely did not know what the heck I was talking about. So the general response was, science is science, religion is religion. They are two totally different things. One is based on facts, the other on fantasy, AKA woo-woo. We love woo-woo. Basically, oil and water, the two will never mix. Now, the response is totally expected because most everyone in Western civilization has the understanding or lives in a model of the universe that is based on separation, that things are separate from each other. Unity does not just subscribe to this model, also known as a paradigm. Unity subscribes to the model of the universe in which everything is fundamentally one. But that's a very uncommon way of looking at things in the West. Not so much in the East. In the Eastern religions, you get a little bit more of that oneness thing. But in the West, it's very uncommon to have this oneness mentality that unity has. But the good news is this separation is beginning to change. And that is changing spiritually, of course, but as far as a humanity as well. And on one of the TED Talks, I got this revelation. When I was writing this, I got this little mini revelation. Because in one of the TED Talks, if you recall, I kind of mentioned it, the guy was talking about everything as one, but from a scientific point of view. And he was talking about this one single-cell little bacteria, at the very beginning of life on the planet. And there was no oxygen. There was none. There was no atmosphere, no ozone, nothing. And these little bacteria exhale oxygen. But they live for a week or maybe 2 weeks. That's the entire lifetime. And then they're dead and they're gone. And he paints the picture. Imagine that they could easily say, well, what was my purpose? I was there for 2 weeks. And what did I do? But over millions of years, they created the atmosphere and then the ozone. And that allowed an entirely new form of life, complex life, to evolve on this planet. And they had no clue what they were contributing to. And the revelation I got is that, that's what we're doing here too. Sometimes we come here every Sunday, we talk about all these wonderful things, these positive things, and we're the leading edge that's bringing forth an entirely new perspective into this planet, a more spiritual perspective. And so I just thought that was kind of nice. Well, it makes me feel good to do that. So, the last couple of months, we've been talking about going through various stages of unfolding, spiritual unfolding or evolution. And the most basic, of course, is the tribal stage. And then I got this idea that We've talked a little bit about spiral dynamics. Have you remember when we talked about that? Our evolution is such that we are spiraling up into a higher level of consciousness, but then we keep seeing the same situations, whether it be forgiveness or this, that, and the other, that we keep facing and coming around. And every time that we see it from a new angle. We see it from a higher perspective. And so now it seems that we're starting a tribal stage all over again, but the tribe now is the whole human race, and not so much just people who live close to us. So that's very encouraging. And speaking of this evolution, normally you turn on the news and it's pretty negative, right? I mean, it really is a little down. But this week, something extraordinary, extraordinary things happened that caught my attention, which I think very promising. The first was this mass exodus of young Russian men leaving, who saying, you know what, we don't want to play that game anymore. We're done with that warrior mentality. And they were all leaving like in the droves. And I thought, wow. And the other one was the protests in Iran of the women, because they beat a woman to death because she had her hair exposed. She wasn't wearing that jihad, what do they call it? Whatever they call it. And yeah, and they're upright, they're kind of just saying, enough of this. We need to move on. And then I thought, I live in Texas, and because that reinforces, making women, let me step back for a second. Making women wear these things is part of the control thing, and reducing women to second-class citizens, basically, what it does. And then I got to thinking, hey, I live in Texas. I could expound on that idea, but I will not. Even though social action is one of our spiritual tools, that is not quite my calling. Maybe somebody else can, take the ball on that and run with that. And then this week, I was also reminded, also one of the spiritual tools was self-reflection. And that is exactly what I'm doing today with this talk, because I'm going through the perspective of where we have been in our consciousness in the past, where we are, and where we're going. So today's lesson, again, is the reconciliation of science and religion is what I called it. And it's this progress of taking us through the stages, as we say in unity, from the Adam man to the Christ consciousness, that unfolding. And I've always been equally as fascinated by the physical universe, by science, as I am by spirituality. I have always been. I mean, I'm just as curious about the workings of the physical world as I am the workings of the spiritual world. Because as I see it, everything is one. And if everything is one, then things are different only in appearance. But more accurately, they're different in vibratory rate, is what's really happening. Nikola Tesla wrote, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. That is fascinating, because back in 1976, I was taking classes for an associate's degree in electronic technology, and I learned about the electromagnetic spectrum. I had never seen that. It was a new idea to me, but I found it extremely intriguing, to the point where 46 years later, I'm talking to you about it. During that same time, an electromagnetic spectrum, if you're familiar with, it's just all the range of all the frequencies that exist, right? And during that same time, I was reading stuff about Eckankar and stuff, and they were telling me that there's all these different levels of spiritual existence, planes of existence, and I thought, wow, this is like the same thing. The electromagnetic spectrum and this astral world and the mental world and all these other stuff. And we just take these things and lump them together and create little ranges of things like in the spectrum, like the X-rays and the gamma rays and the microwaves, just for the sake of helping us sort things out. But they're all just frequencies. They're all just frequencies, and they all exist at the same time, and they don't interfere with each other because they're on different vibrations. And I thought, well, this is all the same thing to me. So that's how I see it. And it just kind of confirmed my deeply held conviction that I always had since I was little, with this conversation about God thing. It's like, we're all talking about the same thing, but we're just calling it different things. And why can't we understand this? It's such a simple thing. And then much later on, when I came across Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a big influence in the unity movement, he wrote this: "There is no bar or wall in the soul where man the effect ceases and God the cause begins. There is no division. It's just a continuum." So let me go step back into this conversation just a little bit and take us back to the earliest of thinkers in the West, that is. Because when man first started to contemplate the universe, they didn't have that view of separation. In antiquity, the scientist and the philosopher one and the same thing. They didn't see this chasm between the spiritual world and the natural world. Pythagoras was a philosopher. He was a mathematician. Aristotle was a philosopher and a scientist. In the Middle Ages, Copernicus, he was a priest and an astronomer. Galileo, likewise, was a scientist and a philosopher. And during times of Jesus, it was all the Greco-Roman world. A couple of months ago, I did a lesson on how Jesus became God, and I mentioned that the majority of people in that world were pagans, and pagans very much believed that it was just a continuum of existence, the higher realms of things, which brought me back to the electromagnetic spectrum. And it's a hierarchy, not in the sense of one thing being superior to another, just being on a different vibration, a higher consciousness type things. And you might ask, but that sounds like separation. I said, well, no, it's not. Because one time I heard this, and I really liked it. It's a little phrase. It says, differentiation is not separation. And I said, I like that. He said, the leg, my arm is different from my leg, but they're not separate, but they are different. So things can be different and still the same, or still one. Anyway, and we know now that this is not woo-woo at all, because quantum physics is telling us that, in fact, everything is really, truly connected. And the real difference between, in the old days and now too, science and religion comes down to who has the authority? Who knows what's going on? And in the old days, it was the church. The church was the undisputed authority on everything. You want to know anything about God, about the universe, about anything, you go to the church. They'll tell you. And this continued up until the Copernican revolution in the 1600s, because that's when the model of the universe was changed from the earth being the center of the universe to the sun being the center. Like I told you that one time, that Copernicus says, I got some good news and I got some bad news. Because they called him in to figure out the calendar. They were off a little bit. And Copernicus told him, what's the good news? He said, I figured out the calendar. What's the bad news? We're not the center of the universe. And they said, Copernicus, you will zip it on that. And he did, until his deathbed. I think that his family or something later published, but he wasn't allowed to talk about these things. Because why? Because now it shattered the view that the church was the authority. Because now it brought into question the validity and the accuracy of the Bible itself, who kind of paints the picture that God made everything just for us. We like ourselves, don't we? And so this really shattered it. And so then 100 years later or so came along Newton, and he just completed the whole thing, shattered the shattering process. Because Newtonian physics, as solid as it is, and it still is, that's how we get things to hit asteroids a gazillion miles away, because through Newtonian physics, but it only applies to the macro world, which is odd. And so, but at the time, they didn't think there was anything else. So all of Newtonian physics is based purely on things that can be measured. The whole spiritual concept was removed from the formula. Now, all of a sudden, science said, we don't need God to figure out the universe. We've got it all figured out. And I told you before that, in fact, the professor, the head of the Harvard physics department made a speech and said, we've got things all figured out. The entire thing. It's just a few little tweaks we got to do, and we got it all figured out. And then, boom, along comes what they say, the proverbial cosmic 2x4. Along comes quantum physics and says, guess what? You don't got nothing figured out, dude. and it really set them back, because now science is looking at, how can we have one universe and two sets of physics? One for the big world and one for the tiny world. How does this stuff work? And so they don't know the answer completely yet. They're still trying to figure that out. But it all falls back down to that oneness thing. And so quantum physics is helping us, along with leading edge spirituality, which I like to think unity is part of. We're coming back together. So that was a full-blown divorce with Newtonian physics. Copernicus started, but it was a full-blown divorce. And then it created two camps of people, the Republicans and the Democrats. No. No, not the Republicans and the Democrats. The ones that believed in science and the ones that believed in religion. And that pretty much is still true today. That's why I got the response that I got. No. Science is science, religion is religion. The two will never mix. And so that came. So why is it a lesson about reconciling science and religion really important on a Sunday morning talk? Well, it's because, for me, I'm trying to establish a larger picture of the congregation, of the consciousness of the congregation, so that we all are kind of on the same page, if you will, so that we all have going in the same direction with our awareness. Because as we continue to grow and unfold, it'll be easier because we all know what we're talking about. We're like on the same page, as I said. In summary, it's really because about unity, about being together in this awareness. So I want to take a couple of moments here to meditate on this awareness of all and this oneness. Dan, can you give me a little bit of the music, please? Divine Spirit, we are grateful today and every Sunday for the opportunity to come together as a spiritual community to share in this time of being in this sacred space, where I open with our minds and our hearts to a greater understanding of the universe and our role within it. As we proceed through this coming week, remember that through everything we see that everything appears and functions differently, although we see it that way. We know that at the very core, everything is connected and everything is one in spirit. As we affirm every Sunday, there is fundamentally only one presence and one power active in the universe and in our lives. And with this understanding, we proceed forward through this week as agents of love and of agents of peace in this great oneness. And so it is.